Dr. Henry Lawson has earned a reputation as a qualified and respected dentist in the small town of Ravenwood. He practiced for decades, his firm hands and gentle demeanor soothing patients who were afraid of visits to the dentist. However, a dark mystery lurks within the walls of his clinic, a mystery that will soon be revealed. One rainy night, a new patient arrived at Dr. Lawson's clinic. The man's face was hidden under a torn hood, his eyes hid the darkness. He spoke in a squeaky voice, barely audible because of the howling of the wind. The secretary, feeling uncomfortable in the air, smiled weakly and handed the man the necessary documents. The clinic was empty that evening, most patients preferring to stay at home in bad weather. Dr. Lawson, not being afraid of the thunderstorm, decided to take care of the mysterious patient. With a feeling of bad foreboding, he led the man into the observation room. The flickering lamps of daylight cast terrible shadows on the walls. While Dr. Lawson was preparing his instruments, he was overcome by a wave of anxiety. The presence of this man seemed unnatural, an otherworldly chill came from his aura. However, he pulled out a smile and proceeded to the usual inspection. Looking into the man's mouth, he noticed something alarming, the complete absence of teeth. It was as if the patient had never had one. The man was silent throughout the examination, only a slight wheezing sound came from his lips. Dr. Lawson, feeling more and more uncomfortable, tried to start a conversation. But the man answered only with a blank look, there was no life or emotion in his eyes. Trying to distract attention from the growing anxiety, Dr. Lawson focused on the task at hand. He began to pierce a man's gum in search of a hidden cavity. As the drill entered the flesh, a painful cry spread throughout the room. It wasn't a patient, it was Dr. Lawson's own voice. The pain he was experiencing was unimaginable, piercing his skull with 1,000 burning needles. In a mad panic, Dr. Lawson recoiled, his hands shaking heavily. But, to his dismay, the patient remained motionless, his mouth gaped in an obsessive smile. Blood was pouring from Dr. Lawson's trembling hands as he backed away, struggling to realize the nightmare unfolding in front of him. From that moment on, Dr. Lawson's affairs took a dark turn. The invisible patient has become constantly present, pursuing him at every waking moment. In his dreams, a patient appeared, a ghostly figure hiding in the shadows, patiently waiting for Dr. Lawson to stop his torments. Soon the health of a once respected dentist began to deteriorate rapidly. Her hair was gray, her hands were shaking incessantly, and her mind was tormented by hallucinations. He felt surrounded by a sinister presence whispering in his ear, prompting him to continue working on the invisible patient. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, as Dr. Lawson, driven to madness, retreated to his clinic, performing monstrous procedures on himself in a desperate attempt to get rid of an invisible patient. But the more he tried, the stronger this presence became, until it engulfed his soul itself. One fateful night, when the full moon was casting a frightening glow on Ravenwood, the townspeople were worried about the sudden disappearance of Dr. Lawson. They gathered near his clinic, their murmur was filled with both curiosity and fear. With a general sigh, they opened the doors, opening their eyes to the scene straight out of a nightmare. There was a mess in the clinic, dental instruments scattered on the floor, blood-stained walls, and the only dental chair. Sitting in the center, surrounded by an aura of darkness. And there, in that chair, Dr. Henry Lawson was sitting, his body was twisted and lifeless, a crooked smile froze on his face. The invisible patient took his last victim, leaving behind horror and despair. The small town of Ravenwood will forever witness the horrors that unfolded within the walls of Dr. Lawson's clinic, a chilling reminder that some patients can never really be seen and that some secrets are best left buried in the shadows.
Dr. Henry Caldwell was known throughout the city for his outstanding dental skills. His clinic, located in a quiet corner of the city, was equipped with the most modern equipment and had a pleasant atmosphere. Patients flocked to his office, seeking solace from toothache and dental problems. But they didn't know that there was an evil presence lurking within the walls of Dr. Caldwell's clinic, waiting to reveal its horrors. Legend had it that the very chair on which the patients lay concealed a dark secret. The cursed chair, as it was called, had a long and sad history. There were rumors about a former dentist who conducted disgusting experiments on his unsuspecting victims. It was said that the souls of those who had the misfortune to undergo his torturous procedures were forever trapped in the chair, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to sit in it. Dr. Caldwell, a man of pragmatic science, dismissed such stories as mere superstition. For him, the chair was just a piece of furniture, a tool to help him in his craft. However, over time, strange events began to unfold within the walls of the clinic. Patients sitting on the cursed chair reported experiencing an overwhelming feeling of fear, as if invisible eyes were watching their every move. Some claimed to have seen fleeting glimpses of dark silhouettes hiding in the corners of the room, only to see them disappear when they blink. The dental instruments seemed to have taken on a life of their own, moving with strange precision, as if they were controlled by invisible hands. One fateful evening, Dr. Caldwell found himself working late, taking care of the teeth of a nervous patient. This man, Mr. Anderson, was suffering from severe toothache and was desperately looking for relief. Despite the patient's concerns, Dr. Caldwell assured him that he would do everything possible to ease his pain. When Mr. Anderson sat down on the damp chair, a shiver ran down his spine. The atmosphere in the room became heavy, and the air seemed to crackle with unnatural energy. Dr. Caldwell, undeterred by the palpable malaise, began his examination. In the middle of the procedure, an icy wind blew into the room, extinguishing the flickering candle on the tray. The clinic plunged into darkness, leaving the dentist and his patient immersed in inky blackness. The only sound that could be heard in the room was the ragged breathing of a frightened Mr. Anderson. Suddenly, dental instruments soared into the air, forming a threatening circle around the patient's head. Dr. Caldwell's eyes widened in horror as he realized he had lost control of his instruments. A voice, cold and ominous, filled the room, coming from an unknown source. "Dr. Caldwell," he hissed, "your arrogance has brought you to this point. For many years I have endured in this miserable chair, waiting for someone like you to free me from my eternal torment." The dentist's heart contracted with fear when he recognized the voice of a long-dead dentist, whose spirit haunted the chair. At that moment, Dr. Caldwell realized the true nature of the curse he had been lifting for so long. When the ghostly figure materialized in front of him, the tormented soul stretched out its ghostly hand. The dentist, terrified, staggered back, knocking over a tray of dental instruments. The cursed chair shook violently, as if possessed by an angry spirit. In a desperate attempt to escape, Dr. Caldwell ran out of the room, leaving behind a moaning ghost and a frightened patient. The clinic has turned into a place of darkness and horror, abandoned by all who once sought solace within its walls. To this day, the cursed chair remains a warning, a creepy fairy tale, a creepy reminder of supernatural forces that can hide in the most ordinary places. Dr. Caldwell, forever marked by his encounter, warns others of the dangers lurking for those who underestimate the power of the unknown. And in an abandoned clinic, the tortured minds of wheelchair victims, forever locked in the walls of their dental purgatory, continue to haunt.
In the heart of a small town, in the middle of tall trees and cobbled streets, there was a discreet dental clinic. His faded ensign said, "Dr. Williams Dentistry," and the locals were whispering about the terrible legend that has haunted the establishment for decades. They talked about a frightening phenomenon called whispering training. Dr. William, a renowned dentist, was terse. His piercing blue eyes and nervous smile seemed to drive even the bravest souls crazy. The patients talked about the cold touches of the dentist, the icy fingers, from which they got goosebumps in the back. But it was his method of using some kind of ancient drill that made their hearts beat with fear. One fateful night, a young girl named Emily arrived at the clinic. Her parents, desperate to find a solution to her painful toothache, asked for help from the famous Dr. William. The dark interior of the clinic and the frightening silence that reigned in the air caused a ball of anxiety in Emily's stomach. Yet her pain was unbearable, leaving her with no choice but to face her fears. As Emily entered the treatment room, she noticed the dim light of flickering candles casting frightening shadows on the walls. Dr. William, whose face was hidden by a surgical mask, invited Emily to sit down. She was shaking, her hands were sticky with excitement while the dentist was preparing his instruments. The drill, an old rusty device, seemed out of place in the modern world of dentistry. Her menacing hum echoed through the room, and as Dr. William bent over Emily, his eyes shone with an ominous intensity. The moment the drill made contact with Emily's tooth, a tremor passed through her back and she swore she had heard a silent whisper. The murmur grew louder every second, weaving itself into an obsessive melody that filled the room. Emily's heartbeat was intensifying and her eyes were running around looking for a source of ghostly voices. But all she could see was Dr. William, his gloved hands gripping the drill tightly as he worked. As the whispers intensified, Emily's pain seemed to be receding. The voices had an otherworldly sound, their frightening harmony increased, then calmed down in a frightening symphony. Fear gnawed at her mind and she begged Dr. William to stop. However, he did not pay attention to it, his eyes were focused on his work, he seemed to ignore the sinister refrain. The whispers began to take shape, falling back on words that crept into Emily's ears. They talked about ancient mysteries, lost souls and the price of forbidden knowledge. The pain returned, sharper than ever, as if the drill had unearthed something outside the realm of the living. Emily's body shook, tears streamed down her face, but Dr. William continued anyway, his eyes glazed over. Suddenly, a loud crackling sound spread throughout the room. The drill broke and Dr. William, coming out of the trance, finally noticed Emily's suffering. The panic showed on his face when he realized the ordeal she had endured. He quickly called his assistant, and together they took Emily out of the procedural cabinet. When Emily, stumbling, entered the waiting area, she noticed that an intense silence reigned in the clinic. Both in the patients and in the staff, the expression of horror was frozen on the face, their eyes were distressed by what they saw. Dr. William came out of the treatment room with drooping shoulders and an expression of guilt on his face. The rumor spread through the city at the speed of a forest fire and soon the dental clinic was abandoned. The inhabitants whispered stories of tortured spirits locked in its walls, eternally whispering their terrible secrets. Dr. William disappeared without a trace, leaving only the remnants of his terrible practice. Years later, the dental clinic is still a dilapidated monument of horror. The children help each other, pretending to hear whispers, an obsessive melody that continues to resonate in the empty rooms. Those brave enough to go inside swear to see a glimpse of the figure wearing a surgical mask, still haunted by the sins of the past. Thus, the legend of Whispering Drill continues to live, reminding that some secrets must never be revealed and that some nightmares will never